The gospel reading for this fourth Sunday of Easter, also known as Good Shepherd Sunday, is from John chapter 10, beginning with the 11th verse. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So, when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. We have had plenty of crises the last 12 to 14 months. And I'm talking about the big ones nationwide. You've probably had some personal ones in addition to that. But one of the many crises we seem to have had in our culture and our nation has been a crisis of authority. Conflicting voices have been very, very loud. Conflicting news reports, conflicting scientific studies, conflicting political experts who have tried to help us manage the challenges of COVID, the challenges of racism, the challenges of global warming, the challenges of political bickering and roadblocks and deadlocks. And with all those things, we hear so many different things on so many sides of the issues that we wonder, what is truth? And by what authority? Many of us have grown not only weary, but also suspicious, maybe even a little cynical, which is kind of a sad thing to be living suspiciously and cynically. You know, it's a sad thing to live that way. But we've got the question, who speaks with authority on these matters? Who is the one whose leadership and guidance we're going to trust? Whose voice, to use the word Jesus uses, whose voice is going to speak the truth? Whose voice will we listen for? I can tell you that those are not new questions. In both the Old and the New Testament, people often wondered whose voice, whose guidance, whose leadership are we going to trust? God had clearly called upon the kings and the prophets of Israel to shepherd people, and they were often referred to as the shepherds of Israel. But you had a lot of bad kings, and you had a lot of false prophets. And so people wondered, who is it that speaks with authority? John's gospel tells us that Jesus is the good shepherd who will lay down his life for the sheep. And somehow that is where we find his authority, that he is the good shepherd. You know, you don't hear many political campaigns where the person has the motto, "I'll be your good shepherd if you'll just elect me." You don't see many bumper stickers saying so-and-so is going to be our good shepherd. Just don't see that kind of thing. But Jesus says that he is the good shepherd, which is the authority that God is giving, has given specifically to Jesus. Meaning what exactly? Well, Jesus begins by contrasting good shepherds and bad shepherds. That's often a technique. You explain one thing, you explain good shepherds by contrasting that with something else, like bad shepherds. The hired hand, he said, is the bad shepherd. Maybe that's too strong of a word. The hired hand is the pseudo shepherd. The hired hand doesn't own the sheep, is not invested in the care and the risks that go along with the well-being of the sheep. The hired hand has taken a job in order to make a living, and we can understand that. He or she is in it for the cash, not the care of the sheep. Sure, the owner needs hired hands. They have their place, of course. The hired hands are not out to destroy the sheep. Not at all. They are going to do their best, but they're not committed enough to risk their lives for the sake of somebody else's sheep. I mean, for $8 an hour, they're not going to fight wolves. All right? Probably you can probably say that too. $8 an hour, you're not going to go out and fight wolves. They, of course, have a legitimate and important job to do. But when it gets down to the bottom line, they are doing it for themselves and not specifically for the sheep. Then the big bad wolf comes. What's that song? Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? What movie? That was in a movie like when I was a kid 1,000 years ago. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? The big bad wolf comes, and the hired hand, the pseudo shepherd, is gone. He or she is out of there. They are not sticking around. They abandon the sheep. They care nothing for the sheep when the wolf is coming. And so the sheep are going to be scattered, and some of them are no doubt going to be killed. There are a lot of hired hands today. A lot of hired hands, both people and institutions. And they have legitimate and sometimes very important roles, but they really don't care. They don't care for the people that they're working with or they are involved with, those that they serve. David Lose wrote an article this week, and I was reading that, and I was struck by his list of current hired hands that he has listed, and I want to share those with you today. The current hired hands, or at least 3 of them in our society. The first one is a mindless consumption society. That is a market-saturated world that is intent on stirring in us, creating in us a sense of lack. And then that sense of lack drives us to consume. Now, granted, marketing plays an important role in our economy, no doubt about it. But it seems like it's becoming something other than sharing information. You know, if you got a good product, you want to share information about this product because it's going to help your life. But it seems like it's becoming less of that and more about creating a sense of inadequacy. I don't have this product, and I think I need this product in order to feel adequate and fulfilled. Therefore, I'm going to do some retail therapy. Retail therapy means you shop till you drop, or at least you shop until you feel pretty good. I'm going to do some retail therapy. That comes from the hired hand of mindless consumption. A second modern hired hand is the recent rise and omnipresence of social media. Again, it's a very good thing. In fact, it's a great thing. It's very important, especially during this time of COVID. People have relied on social media more than ever in order to connect with one another. We have relied upon it so that people can worship online, and during the week they can come to Bible study, they can pray, we can join together through social media. It has been really important to the keeping of faith during these days. But as David Lose points out, the dominant value, he says, the dominant value in social media corporations is not altruistic, but monetary. Which is right, isn't it? I mean, the profits are tied to the amount of time that you spend on those sites. They have sophisticated content algorithms that are constantly identifying you and your tendencies and your likes and your dislikes. All that is being identified, and then they tailor the content to your likes and your dislikes. They want to keep you staring at the screen. Of course they do. It's how they make their money. And in addition to that, a lot of people get caught up. They'll get caught up in being liked or in being followed, which can lead to that need for affirmation, external affirmation, which can lead to self-absorption, which can lead to insecurity. A third hired hand today is the polarized, hyper-partisan politics of division, POD, a different kind of POD, politics of division. Again, it starts with something great, something that is absolutely vital and important. A democratic Republican government is one of God's great gifts to us and to politics in general. Its invention literally changed the lives and changed the world for many people today. Politics, the word politics itself, comes from the Greek word polis, which means the people. And so politics is really an important agency by which God takes care of people in this world. But in recent years, the emphasis has been focused upon what we're against and who we're against, instead of what we're for or who we're for. And so it seems like people on both sides of the aisle, so many of them have the inability to even talk with one another, much less listen to what the other person is saying. There is such a political identity of opposition. What'd you say? I don't know. I'm against it. Whatever it is you say, I'm against it. And so that breeds hate, and that leads, of course, to violence, as we have seen. So mindless consumption, overvaluing social media, and politics of division. Those are three of the hired hands today. And as I say, they have their place. They really do. But what all three of these hired hands have in common is a focus on the self. The self is raised above everything else and everybody else, and there's a name for that. It's called original sin. That's where the concept came from centuries and centuries ago. Original sin is the focus and the elevation of the self above everything else, including God. Plus, we've got all these false reports, these false narratives about scarcity, that God can't really provide, that the world that God created is not really enough for us, which leads to low trust or no trust, which leads in turn to fear. So the messaging of the hired hands is fairly consistent. You do not have enough. You are not enough. Image is everything. You should be afraid. You are what you own. We keep hearing those kinds of messages from these hired hands. And so David Lose, in his article, concludes, beneath all those messages is a single and consistent demand: justify yourself. Which, of course, in the Bible is exactly the thing that St. Paul says we cannot do. We cannot justify ourselves to one another or to God. Your worth and your existence does not depend on you justifying yourself to somebody else, or especially to God. Not at all. Only God justifies. Enter now the Good Shepherd. Enter the Good Shepherd. Jesus says, I am the Good Shepherd. And 5 times in this passage, I'm not sure that I remember that before when I've studied this text, but I counted them. 5 times in these few verses, Jesus says, I lay down my life for my sheep. The Good Shepherd puts the sheep before his own self. He sacrifices if necessary. That is sacrificial love. And sacrificial love is the purpose of Jesus. Sacrificial love is the source of his power and his authority. There's that word that we started out with, authority. In the Greek New Testament, the word for authority and power is exactly the same word, his authority. Jesus is a leader with authority who lays down his life, not only with his words, but also with his costly actions on Mount Calvary. Jesus literally places his body in the way of death and harm for the sake of those he leads, just as a shepherd, as a good shepherd will somehow lead the wolf away from the sheep so that the sheep are protected. And Jesus takes upon himself, as a good shepherd would, the fate of what would have fallen upon the sheep. The shepherd takes upon himself. Jesus says, I have authority to lay down my life and authority to take it up again. And that's the basis of his authority. His death and his resurrection, his laying down of life and his taking up life again. Only the Good Shepherd can do that. You want to be shepherd? Well, the only thing you got to do is die on a cross and rise again in 3 days. Then you can be shepherd. Otherwise, we're the sheep. Only Jesus has the power to be the Good Shepherd. And I know that power and that authority does not make us perfectly safe in this world, because it's a dangerous world, which is why we call it a fallen world in theology. It's a fallen world. It's a dangerous world, and those dangers are real. But Jesus does provide the security of unfailing love. He provides the security of unfailing love, which, when you get down to it, is what we really need most. That unfailing love. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. And the Good Shepherd's job is to see about that wolf. It's not the sheep's job to tend to the wolf. It's the Good Shepherd's job to tend to that wolf. The sheep's job, goodness gracious, the sheep's job is to stay by the shepherd. That's the main job of the sheep, to stay by the shepherd. Because it's where you belong. brothers and sisters. It's where we belong. Amen.